Sirens wailed in the distance, but a heavy, deceptive silence weighed over Oak Ridge Estates. Power dynamics shift in the blink of an eye. Arthur Sterling stood his ground as cold steel clicked around his wrists. Two arrogant patrolmen smiled, completely unaware they had just arrested their new commanding officer. Autumn leaves drifted down onto the manicured lawns of Oak Ridge Estates, a neighborhood where the driveways were swept, the hedges were perfectly squared, and the residents paid a premium for quiet exclusivity. Arthur Sterling breathed in the crisp October air, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He was 54 years old, with salt and pepper hair cut close to his scalp, broad shoulders that carried the weight of 3 decades in law enforcement, and a calm, observant gaze. Today, Arthur was not in uniform. He wore faded denim jeans, a plain gray work shirt damp with exertion, and scuffed leather boots. He had spent the last 3 hours pulling overgrown weeds and clearing debris from the side yard of a 2-story colonial home he had closed on just 4 days prior. Moving to Fairview was supposed to be a fresh start after a decorated career cleaning up corruption in Detroit's Internal Affairs Division. The mayor of Fairview had personally recruited Arthur to take over a police department plagued by civil rights lawsuits, plunging public trust, and a toxic internal culture. His official swearing-in ceremony was scheduled for Monday morning. Until then, Arthur just wanted to enjoy the weekend and get his new house in order. A black and white Fairview Police Department cruiser turned onto Elmwood Drive, crawling at a slow, predatory pace. Arthur noticed it immediately. 30 years on the job had permanently altered his peripheral vision. He tracked the vehicle's movement without turning his head. Inside the cruiser sat Officer Greg Harding and Officer Timothy Briggs. Harding was a 12-year veteran of the force, a man whose thick neck and heavy build matched his blunt, often brutal approach to policing. He had a file of excessive force complaints, thick enough to choke a horse, but the union had always shielded him. Briggs was 3 years out of the academy, young, impressionable, and desperate to earn Harding's approval. "Stop the car," Harding grunted, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Arthur standing near the side gate of the colonial house. Briggs tapped the brakes. "What is it?" "Take a look," Harding said, gesturing with his chin. "You recognize him?" Briggs squinted through the windshield. "No. Landscaper? On a Saturday afternoon? Without a company truck? In Oak Ridge?" Harding scoffed, throwing the cruiser into park. "Not likely. We've had those package thefts lately. Guys casing the joint. Let's go see what his story is." Arthur heard the heavy thud of the cruiser doors slamming shut. He didn't tense, but his mind automatically shifted gears from civilian homeowner to seasoned investigator. He turned slowly, holding a pair of gardening shears in his right hand, pointing them safely toward the ground. "Hey, you there! Drop whatever you've got in your hand and step away from the house," Harding barked, his voice echoing in the quiet suburban street. His right hand rested casually, yet threateningly, on the butt of his holstered service weapon. Arthur assessed the tactical approach. It was sloppy. Harding was projecting aggression immediately, failing to assess the actual threat level. Briggs was hanging back, nervously mirroring his partner's aggressive posture, but lacking the confidence to back it up. Arthur calmly tossed the shears onto the grass and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Afternoon, officers. Is there a problem?" "I'll ask the questions," Harding said, stepping onto the driveway and closing the distance. He stopped a few feet away, invading Arthur's personal space. "What are you doing here?" "I'm doing some yard work," Arthur replied, his voice an even, unbothered baritone. "Who do you work for?" Briggs chimed in, trying to sound authoritative. "I don't work for a landscaping company, if that's what you're implying," Arthur said. "I own this property." Harding let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He looked Arthur up and down, taking in the dirty work clothes, the sweat, and the color of his skin. "You own this house? This one right here? The Miller place?" "The Millers sold it. It closed on Tuesday," Arthur corrected gently. He noted the blatant disbelief in the officer's eyes. It was textbook profiling. Exactly the kind of behavior the mayor had hired him to eradicate. Right, Harding sneered. And I'm the King of England. Let's see some ID, buddy. Am I suspected of committing a crime, officer? Arthur asked. He kept his hands visible, resting them lightly on his hips. He knew the law in this state. Stop and identify statutes required reasonable, articulable suspicion of a crime before an officer could legally compel a citizen to provide identification. Harding's jaw tightened. The casual disrespect of being questioned infuriated him. I told you to give me your ID. You're trespassing on private property, and you match the description of a prowler in the area. A prowler doing yard work in broad daylight? Arthur challenged softly. That doesn't meet the threshold for a Terry stop, officer. If you want to verify I own the house, you can check the county assessor's website. The deed was recorded Thursday. Listen to me, you arrogant son of a bitch. Harding stepped closer, his face flushing red. I don't care what legal mumbo-jumbo you watched on television. In this town, when I ask for your ID, you hand it over, or you go for a ride. Now, are you going to comply, or are we going to do this the hard way? Arthur looked at Harding, memorizing the officer's badge number. 4,182. He then glanced at Briggs. Officer, I highly suggest you counsel your partner. This is an unlawful detainment. Briggs hesitated, looking between Arthur and Harding. Look, man, just give us the ID and we can clear this all up. Don't make it difficult. I am perfectly within my rights, Arthur stated, his voice dropping an octave, radiating a sudden, intense authority that made Briggs flinch. I am not providing identification under the threat of unlawful arrest. That's it, Harding snapped. He lunged forward, grabbing Arthur's right arm and twisting it violently behind his back. Arthur did not resist. He knew better than to physically fight a police officer on the street. 30 years of training kicked in. He yielded his body weight, allowing Harding to spin him around and slam him face first against the rough brick exterior of the house. The impact sent a sharp jolt of pain through Arthur's shoulder, but he kept his face impassive. Stop resisting! Stop resisting! Harding yelled. A tactical performance purely for the benefit of any neighbors watching through their blinds. I am not resisting, Arthur said calmly, his cheek pressed against the cold brick. You are using excessive force. You have no probable cause. Shut up, Harding growled. He dug his knee sharply into the back of Arthur's thigh, forcing him to spread his legs. The metallic ratcheting sound of handcuffs clicking tightly over Arthur's wrists echoed in the driveway. Harding squeezed the cuffs until they bit into the skin, purposely failing to double lock them or check the spacing. Check his pockets, Tim, Harding ordered, breathing heavily. Briggs stepped up, his hands shaking slightly as he patted down Arthur's jeans. He reached into the back pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. Got his wallet. Good. Put him in the car. Harding shoved Arthur toward the cruiser. Arthur walked with dignity, his head held high. He didn't stumble, despite Harding's aggressive pushing. As they reached the cruiser, Harding didn't bother to guide Arthur's head beneath the doorframe. Arthur had to duck sharply to avoid hitting his skull, sliding awkwardly into the hard plastic back seat of the squad car. Harding slammed the door shut and walked around to the front, leaning against the hood, while Briggs flipped open the wallet. What's the name? Harding asked through the open window. Arthur Sterling. Briggs read off the Michigan driver's license. Address is out of Detroit. Detroit. Harding laughed, shaking his head. Figures. Probably came down here thinking Fairview was easy pickings. Run the name for warrants. Briggs typed the information into the mobile data terminal. A few seconds later, he shook his head. Nothing. Completely clean record. No wants, no warrants. Doesn't matter, Harding said, getting into the driver's seat. We'll book him for trespassing, failure to identify, and resisting arrest. That'll keep him in holding over the weekend. Maybe teach him some respect for this neighborhood. Briggs got into the passenger seat, looking nervously at Arthur through the plexiglass partition. You think the trespassing charge will stick? He did say he owned the place. Who cares if it sticks, Tim? Harding shifted the car into drive. The point is the ride. You let one of these guys talk back to you, tell you the law. They think they own the streets. You gotta shut it down immediately. In the back seat, Arthur listened to every word. The cruiser smelled of stale coffee and sweat. His wrists throbbed where the steel cuffs pressed against bone. But the physical discomfort was secondary to the cold fury burning in his chest. This was exactly what the mayor had described in their private meetings. A culture of impunity, a blatant disregard for civil rights, a toxic rot spreading from the patrol cars all the way up the chain of command. Arthur remained entirely silent during the 15-minute drive to the downtown precinct. He did not ask for a lawyer. He did not plead his case. He just sat, his sharp eyes locked on the back of Harding's neck, mentally drafting the termination paperwork he would be signing on Monday. "You're awfully quiet back there, Detroit," Harding mocked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Realized you messed with the wrong cops? In Fairview, we don't play those big city games. You act like a thug, you get treated like one. I am simply observing. Officer Harding." Arthur spoke for the first time since being placed in the car. His voice was chillingly calm, devoid of any panic or fear. Harding frowned, slightly unsettled by the prisoner's demeanor. Most guys in the back were either screaming curses or begging for a break. This guy sat there like a judge, evaluating a trial. Yeah? Well, observe the inside of a cell. The cruiser pulled into the gated sally port behind the Fairview Police Department headquarters. The heavy metal doors rolled down, sealing them inside the concrete garage. Harding and Briggs got out and opened the rear door. Harding grabbed Arthur by the bicep, hauling him out roughly. "Walk." They led him through the heavy security doors and into the chaotic, brightly lit booking area. Telephones were ringing. Officers were typing reports, and a strong smell of industrial cleaner hung in the air. At the elevated front desk sat Sergeant Miller, a 20-year veteran with a thick mustache and a tired expression. He looked up from his paperwork as Harding marched Arthur toward the counter. "What do we got, Harding?" Sergeant Miller asked, reaching for a booking sheet. "Prowler up in Oak Ridge," Harding said proudly, leaning against the counter. "Caught him, casing a property. Refused to ID. Got combative. We got him for trespassing, failure to comply, and resisting." Miller sighed, looking at Arthur. "Name?" Before Arthur could answer, a door down the hallway clicked open. Captain Robert Hayes, the interim commander of the precinct, stepped out into the booking area, holding a stack of files. Hayes was a stressed man, counting the days until the new chief arrived to take the burden off his shoulders. Hayes looked up from his files. His eyes swept over the booking desk, landing on Harding, then Briggs, and finally settling on the man in handcuffs. Captain Hayes stopped dead in his tracks. The files slipped from his hands, scattering violently across the linoleum floor. All the color drained from his face. Captain Robert Hayes stood frozen. The scattered manila folders fanned out around his polished shoes like fallen leaves. The bustling noise of the downtown precinct, the ringing phones, the clatter of keyboards, the low hum of nervous chatter from the holding cells seemed to instantly evaporate, sucked into a vacuum of sudden, paralyzing dread. Hayes had spent the previous Thursday evening at the Fairview Country Club, dining privately with Mayor Richard Hastings, and the man brought in to save their sinking city. Hayes knew the face of the man, currently standing at his booking counter, in handcuffs. He knew the stern jawline, the salt and pepper hair, and the piercing, analytical eyes that were currently fixed upon him with the intensity of a laser. "Captain?" Sergeant Miller asked, half rising from his chair behind the elevated desk. "You all right, sir?" Hayes did not answer Miller. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly completely dry, and took a slow, deliberate step forward. His eyes darted from the heavy steel handcuffs biting into the man's wrists to Officer Greg Harding, who was leaning casually against the counter, a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. "Harding," Hayes managed to croak, his voice cracking under the immense weight of the catastrophe unfolding before his eyes. He cleared his throat and tried again, his tone rising to a sharp, panicked bark. "Officer Harding, what in the name of God are you doing?" Harding pushed off the counter, his smile faltering slightly at the captain's volatile tone. Just a standard collar cap. Prowler up in Oak Ridge Estates. Caught him casing the old Miller property. Guy got combative. Refused to ID. Typical resisting. Take them off, Hayes interrupted, his voice dropping into a deadly trembling whisper. Harding blinked, genuinely confused. He looked at Arthur, then back at his commanding officer. Sir? He hasn't been processed yet. I need to run his prints. He's claiming he owns a house in Oak Ridge, which is obvious bull. I said, take the goddamn handcuffs off him right now, Hayes roared. The sheer volume of the shout echoed off the cinder block walls, silencing the remaining murmurs in the booking area. Every officer, clerk, and civilian in the room stopped and turned to stare. Officer Timothy Briggs, standing a few feet behind Harding, physically recoiled. A cold bead of sweat trickled down the back of his neck. His instincts, sharper and less poisoned by arrogance than his partners, screamed that they had just stepped onto a landmine. Captain, with all due respect, he's my prisoner, Harding argued, his face flushing with defensive anger. He hated being dressed down in front of the bullpen. He violated a lawful order. I'm charging him with. You aren't charging him with anything, you absolute idiot. Hayes closed the distance, grabbing Harding by the shoulder of his uniform and violently shoving him aside. He stepped directly in front of Arthur, his hands visibly shaking as he reached for his own keychain. Sir, I am so incredibly sorry. I had no idea. Please, allow me. Hayes fumbled with the tiny handcuff key, his hands trembling so badly he dropped it twice on the linoleum. Arthur did not move to help him. He simply turned his wrists, exposing the reddened, swelling skin, where Harding had purposely ratcheted the steel too tight. Take your time, Captain Hayes. There is no rush now. Sir, Hayes finally managed to insert the key, twisting it frantically. The cuffs sprang open with a loud, metallic clack. Hayes pulled them away as if they were burning hot iron. Harding watched the exchange with mounting indignation. Captain, what the hell is going on? You can't just unarrest a suspect, because... Shut your mouth, Harding. Hayes spun around, his face purple with rage. Do you have any idea who this man is? Do you have a single, functioning brain cell left in your head? Harding frowned, his bravado finally cracking as he registered the pure, unadulterated terror radiating from his captain. He's his ID, said Arthur Sterling. From Detroit. Yes, Hayes hissed, stepping aside so Harding had a clear, unobstructed view of the man he had just assaulted. Arthur Sterling, formerly the deputy chief of the Detroit Police Department's Internal Affairs Bureau, and, as of this coming Monday, the newly appointed chief of police for the city of Fairview. The silence in the room became absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating weight. Harding's face went entirely slack. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. His jaw literally dropped, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as his brain desperately tried to process the catastrophic reality of the situation. He looked at Arthur's dirty jeans, his work shirt, and then up to the calm, unblinking eyes of his new superior officer. Behind Harding, Briggs let out a quiet, strangled gasp. The young officer stumbled backward until his back hit the concrete wall, his knees knocking together. He felt violently ill. Chief Sterling, Hayes said, turning back to Arthur, his voice dropping into a tone of absolute deference and desperation. Sir, I cannot begin to apologize for this. This is an aberration. This does not represent the Fairview Police Department. Arthur slowly rubbed his wrists, bringing the circulation back to his hands. He did not yell. He did not flex his newfound authority with shouting or theatrics. Instead, he radiated a terrifying, icy calm that was infinitely more intimidating. Captain Hayes, Arthur said, his baritone voice echoing clearly in the dead silent room. We both know that is a lie. This is exactly what represents the Fairview Police Department. This is precisely why Mayor Richard Hastings hired me. Arthur turned his gaze to Harding. Harding physically shrank, his broad shoulders suddenly looking frail. Officer Harding, badge number 4182, Arthur stated, his memory flawless. You initiated an investigative stop without reasonable, articulable suspicion. You demanded identification without lawful authority. When I asserted my constitutional rights, you escalated to physical violence, committed assault and battery under color of law, and unlawfully deprived me of my liberty. Chief, I thought. Harding stammered, his voice weak, the arrogance completely stripped away. You didn't look like the neighborhood. I didn't look like I belonged in Oak Ridge Estates. Arthur finished the sentence for him, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. Because of the color of my skin, you profiled me, you assaulted me, and then you sat in the front seat of your taxpayer-funded cruiser and bragged about how you handle thugs in this town. Arthur held out his right hand, palm up. Your badge and your weapon. Right now. Harding hesitated, his eyes wide with panic. Chief, please, we can talk about this. The Union. This is not a negotiation. Arthur's voice cracked like a whip, causing several officers in the room to flinch. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Hand over your sidearm, your badge, your taser, and your radio. If you refuse, Captain Hayes will arrest you for insubordination and failure to comply with a direct order from your commanding officer. Trembling violently, Harding unclipped his radio, setting it on the booking desk. He unpinned his silver badge, his fingers clumsy, and placed it next to the radio. Finally, he unholstered his service weapon, dropping the magazine, ejecting the chambered round, and sliding it across the counter. Arthur then turned his piercing gaze to Briggs, who was practically hyperventilating against the wall. Officer Briggs, Arthur said softly. Yes, sir, Briggs squeaked, standing at attention. You failed to intervene when your partner committed a felony civil rights violation, Arthur said. You failed to protect a citizen from unlawful harm. You are also relieved of duty, pending a full internal affairs review. Surrender your equipment to the desk sergeant. As Briggs hurriedly unbuckled his entire duty belt, sobbing quietly, Arthur turned back to Captain Hayes. Captain, lock down the evidence room. Pull the GPS and dashcam footage from their cruiser, as well as the body camera footage. If I find out a single second of tape is missing, corrupted, or mysteriously deleted, I will hold you personally responsible. Yes, Chief, Hayes said quickly, already reaching for the desk phone. And Captain? Arthur paused, turning toward the hallway that led to the executive offices. Call Mayor Hastings. Tell him I'm starting early. By Monday morning, the Fairview Police Department was a fortress of paranoia and tension. The swearing-in ceremony had been moved from the public plaza to a closed-door session in the mayor's office. There were no smiles, no celebratory cake, and no press. Just the grim reality of a house cleaning. Arthur Sterling sat behind the massive oak desk in the chief's office. He wore his Class A uniform, the 4 gold stars on his collar gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The brass nameplate on his desk was brand new. Sitting across from him were Officer Greg Harding, dressed in a cheap civilian suit, and Thomas Granger, the combative president of the Fairview Police Benevolent Association. Next to them sat Mitchell Reed, the city attorney, looking deeply uncomfortable. Chief Sterling, this is a massive overreaction, Granger argued, slamming a thick folder onto the desk. Officer Harding has 12 years on the job. He made a good faith mistake, based on a profile of recent burglaries in the area. You cannot terminate a senior officer without progressive discipline. The union will file a grievance. We will take this to arbitration, and he will be back on the street with back pay. Arthur leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He let the union rep rant, his expression completely unreadable. Are you finished, Mr. Granger? Arthur asked quietly. For now, Granger huffed, crossing his arms. Harding sat next to him, looking sullen but visibly clinging to the hope that his union rep would save him, just as the union had always done. Good, Arthur said. He opened a slim black folder on his desk. Because you are operating under the delusion that this is a simple disciplinary hearing. It is not. Arthur slid a document across the desk toward City Attorney Reed. Mr. Reed, Please verify the signature on that document. Reed adjusted his glasses, scanning the paper. His eyes widened. It's a federal subpoena. From the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Granger frowned. DOJ? What does the DOJ have to do with a mistaken identity stop? Everything. A new voice spoke from the corner of the room. A tall man in a dark suit stepped out of the shadows. He had been sitting perfectly still in the corner since they entered. He walked forward, flashing a gold badge. Special Agent David Rossi, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Harding's sullen expression vanished, instantly replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He gripped the armrests of his chair so hard, his knuckles turned white. You see, Officer Harding, Arthur began, leaning forward, resting his forearms on the desk. When Mayor Hastings contacted me 6 months ago about taking this job, he didn't just ask me to be a figurehead. He gave me unrestricted access to the department's internal complaint files. I spent months in Detroit reading about your specific patrol unit. Arthur tapped a massive stack of files sitting on the corner of his desk. I read about the traffic stops where you disabled your dash cam. I read about the resisting arrest charges that always seem to result in broken orbital bones for the suspects. I read about the systemic terror you and your clique inflicted on the minority neighborhoods of this city. Harding swallowed hard, looking desperately at his union rep. Tom, do something. Chief, you can't use past closed complaints to justify a termination today, Granger said, though his voice had lost its aggressive edge. I don't need to, Arthur said smoothly, because I contacted Agent Rossi 3 months ago. The FBI has been quietly investigating your department, building a case for a pattern or practice federal consent decree. But they needed a catalyst. They needed a rock-solid, undeniable incident to break the blue wall of silence. Arthur paused, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. I bought the house in Oak Ridge Estates intentionally. Harding. It's in your patrol sector. I knew your schedule. I went outside in dirty clothes on a Saturday afternoon, knowing exactly how a man like you would react to a black man in an affluent neighborhood. Harding gasped, the horrific realization washing over him. You set me up. I simply provided the opportunity, Arthur corrected sharply. You chose to violate my Fourth Amendment rights. You chose to assault me. You chose to falsify a police report, which you attempted to file right up until Captain Hayes stopped you. And the best part? Arthur pressed a button on his desk. A flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall sprang to life, displaying a crystal-clear, high-definition video of the arrest. The audio was pristine, capturing every racist sneer, every illegal threat, and the sickening click of the handcuffs. You thought you were out of frame of the cruiser's dash cam, Arthur said. But the previous owner of my new house had installed concealed, high-definition security cameras in the brickwork. It captured the entire encounter from 3 different angles. It captured you committing a federal crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. City Attorney Mitchell Reed rubbed his temples, realizing the massive legal liability the city was facing. Chief, the city will not defend him against federal criminal charges. You can't do this, Harding suddenly shouted, jumping to his feet. I gave 12 years to this city. I bled for this department. Sit down, Agent Rossi commanded, his hand resting casually near his holstered weapon. Harding slowly sank back into his chair, defeated. It gets worse for you, Harding, Arthur continued mercilessly. Your partner, Officer Briggs, sat in this exact office an hour ago. When faced with federal accessory charges, he suddenly found his conscience. He gave a full, sworn statement detailing not only your assault on me, but 3 other specific incidents of excessive force you committed this year alone. He has agreed to testify against you in federal court. The hard karma struck Harding with the force of a freight train. The blue wall had collapsed. His partner had flipped. The union could not protect him from the FBI. His pension was gone. His freedom was hanging by a thread. Arthur looked at the union representative. You will not file a grievance. You will accept Harding's immediate termination. If you fight this, I will hold a press conference at noon and release the security footage to every national news network, dragging this union through the mud on a federal stage. Are we clear? Granger looked at the monitor, then at Agent Rossi, and finally at Harding, who was now burying his face in his hands, weeping openly. We're clear, Chief, Granger muttered, standing up and stepping away from Harding as if the man were suddenly contagious. Good, Arthur said. He turned his attention back to the disgraced officer. Gregory Harding, you are officially terminated from the Fairview Police Department. Your name will be submitted to the state decertification database. You will never wear a badge again. Agent Rossi, he's all yours. Agent Rossi stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy federal handcuffs from his belt. Gregory Harding, you are under arrest for federal civil rights violations. Stand up and put your hands behind your back. Arthur Sterling watched impassively as Harding was handcuffed and led out of the chief's office in tears. The rot had been deep, but the surgery had finally begun. Arthur pulled a fresh notepad toward him, picked up his pen, and prepared to rebuild his department from the ground up. News of the arrest broke before noon on Monday, shattering the complacency of Fairview like a brick through a stained glass window. Mayor Richard Hastings stood shoulder to shoulder with Chief Arthur Sterling at the municipal podium, facing a sea of flashbulbs and aggressive reporters. Sterling did not offer the standard, watered-down public relations statement about a few bad apples. Instead, he laid bare the systemic failures of the department, projecting an aura of absolute, unyielding accountability. He announced the immediate termination of Officer Gregory Harding and the sweeping internal affairs audit of the entire patrol division. The real-life consequences for Harding were swift, brutal, and entirely of his own making. The federal indictment came down 3 weeks later, brought forth by Assistant United States Attorney Jonathan Pierce. Harding was charged not only with the deprivation of Sterling's civil rights under color of law, but also with 4 additional felony counts stemming from previous, historically buried assaults that Timothy Briggs had officially corroborated. The trial, held in the federal courthouse downtown, became a national spectacle and a grim case study in police misconduct. Harding's high-priced defense attorney attempted to paint his client as a proactive, hard-working officer, navigating a high-crime era, but the high-definition security footage of Sterling's arrest dismantled the argument frame by agonizing frame. The jury watched Harding's unprovoked physical aggression, listened to his arrogant, racially charged boasting in the cruiser, and heard the undeniable proof of systemic profiling. AUSA Pierce's closing argument was a masterclass in righteous condemnation, pointing directly at Harding and declaring him a predator who wore a badge to camouflage his cruelty. When Judge Thomas Sullivan handed down the sentence, the courtroom was suffocatingly silent. Harding, stripped of his uniform, his dignity, and his once impenetrable Union protection, openly wept as he received 46 months in federal prison. The hard karma extended far beyond the cold concrete of his cell. Because his crimes were committed under the color of law and involved felony civil rights violations, the City Pension Board convened a special session and voted unanimously to strip him of his retirement benefits. Financial ruin followed with merciless speed. His home went into foreclosure to pay his mounting legal fees, and his wife, unable to bear the public disgrace and the sudden collapse of their affluent lifestyle, filed for divorce before his first year behind bars was even complete. Harding, who once ruled the streets of Fairview with an iron fist, was reduced to a terrifyingly vulnerable inmate in a federal facility, constantly looking over his shoulder. Timothy Briggs avoided prison time due to his extensive cooperation with federal authorities, but his career in law enforcement was permanently obliterated. He pleaded guilty to a lesser misdemeanor charge of failing to intervene, received 2 years of probation, and surrendered his state peace officer certification. He eventually found work driving a commercial delivery truck, a grueling daily reminder of the respected career he threw away by failing to stand up to a bully. Back at the Fairview Police Department, Chief Sterling wasted no time tearing down the toxic foundation Harding had thrived upon. With the active backing of the DOJ consent decree, Sterling forced the local police union to the negotiating table. He implemented a strict zero-tolerance duty to intervene policy, making it an immediately fireable offense for any officer to stand by while a colleague used excessive force. He banned warrior-style training seminars, replacing them with mandatory, continuous education in de-escalation and crisis intervention. Furthermore, dashcams and body cameras were heavily upgraded. The footage was no longer stored on local precinct hard drives. It was automatically uploaded to a secure, encrypted cloud server managed by an independent civilian oversight board. This effectively destroyed the ability of precinct captains, like Robert Hayes, to lose or corrupt embarrassing tapes to protect their subordinates. Captain Hayes, recognizing the writing on the wall and his own complicity in the previous regime, quietly submitted his early retirement papers. Sterling accepted them, without a word of thanks. The culture shock within the precinct was immense. Over the next 6 months, 22 officers resigned rather than adapt to the rigorous new standard of constitutional policing. Sterling considered it a highly successful purge. He replaced them with a diverse, highly educated class of fresh recruits who understood that they were public servants, not an occupying military force. Oak Ridge Estates, the very neighborhood where Sterling was arrested, became the pilot zone for a new community outreach initiative. Officers were required to walk the beat, attend neighborhood association meetings, and build genuine rapport with the residents. Arthur Sterling still spent his weekends doing yard work at his colonial home on Elmwood Drive. He still wore faded denim jeans, a plain gray work shirt, and scuffed boots. But when a black and white cruiser rolled past his property now, the officers inside didn't stop to demand his identification or question his presence. They rolled down the window, offered a respectful, crisp salute to their chief, and kept driving, fully aware that the era of arrogant impunity in Fairview was dead and buried forever. True justice requires more than removing a bad actor. It demands dismantling the system, protecting them. Chief Arthur Sterling's arrival in Fairview proved that unchecked authority ultimately collapses under the weight of its own arrogance. By turning a gross violation of his own civil rights into a catalyst for sweeping reform, he transformed a corrupt department into a beacon of accountable law enforcement. Unwavering accountability had finally arrived.